Why, hello there, I'm Professor Joel, and today I am reviewing The Scarab Lives, which might be one of the most hated episodes of Scooby-Doo because it is the premiere of Scrappy-Doo. This is his first appearance, and please don't let that turn you off from watching this episode. I think you should give it a chance. It's not that bad. This episode originally aired on September 22nd, 1979, so it's a decade after Scooby-Doo was released, and they created Scrappy-Doo because they needed a new audience to target. Everyone who started watching Scooby-Doo when they were 6 or whatever were 16 and probably no longer watching cartoons, and they had to attract a younger audience, and they also had to switch up the formula. Did everything in the book in the previous 10 years that they could kind of do with Scooby without repeating themselves, so they had to kind of freshen things up. So for this season, Scrappy was voiced by the late Lennie Weinrib, who passed away in 2006. Lennie's Scrappy has more of a tough puppy and perhaps Bronx accent that you're probably familiar with because Scrappy was voiced by Don Messick later on for several seasons after that you're typically familiar with. Actually, Lennie's Scrappy kind of reminds me of like if Rosie O'Donnell was a baby. If she was doing a cartoon voice, kind of reminds me of Scrappy. So Lennie only voiced Scrappy for one season because he asked for more money and they just kind of let him go because Hanna-Barbera was kind of cheap and they just wanted to pay everyone at scale. So the interesting thing about this episode is that it was a game changer for Scooby-Doo. They had a lot riding on this episode. They actually auditioned tons of people for this episode and filmed it multiple times until they finally settled on Lennie. One interesting thing is that they auditioned and recorded it with Frank Welker, and during an ad-lib, Frank Welker came up with the famous phrase, "puppy power," but said, as Scrappy says it, where he kind of stutters it. You can read about all of this in a blog by Mark Evanier, who wrote this episode. I'll leave a link below. It's fascinating if you're interested in Scooby-Doo history and such. Also, this episode was based on a comic book that Mark Evanier wrote in 1970 called The Mark of the Scarab. Obviously, the comic book did not include Scrappy, but the concepts of this episode were similar. And before I get on to my review, I just have a bit of housekeeping to do. The first one is that there are new laws on YouTube that I have to follow, and one of them is I have to mark my videos for kids. While I consider my videos for everyone, like I think most of my audience is probably 13 plus, I have to consider the fact that my videos are attractive to kids, and kids under the age of 13 need to be protected from privacy rights and issues and collections and stuff. And so no one can leave a comment, unfortunately, on my video. That's what YouTube decided on. If you mark your video for kids, no one can leave a comment. It's kind of absurd, but you gotta roll with the punches, I suppose. You also won't get video notifications anymore. It's going to be tough for me going forward to trying building an audience because I loved the community of people talking, leaving comments on my videos. I loved everyone's comments who left them. Everyone just always left interesting things to say. I liked hearing about people reminiscing about episodes. But yeah, it's a sad news. And you can't leave requests anymore. I do have a website. I'm going to maybe build a request form where you could submit a request without leaving your email or your name or whatever, so you're protected by privacy as well. And I'm going to look into that. The website is planetscooby.com, and I'll leave a link below for that as well. And the last bit of housekeeping I wanted to do was that I'm switching to an every other week format with my videos. I was doing one once a week, but as time went on, I found I was kind of rushing through it, not taking my time with it, and I feel like the quality was kind of suffering. So now we're going to do every other week, and I hope everything kind of gets funnier and more entertaining and the quality is there. Enough with my jibber jabber, on with the show. The episode begins with the Blue Scarab breaking into Jerry Sloan's, who is a cartoonist, apartment via a rooftop skylight. While working, Jerry is startled by the Scarab alarm and is then confronted by his own creation, the Blue Scarab.
That noise, where's it coming from?
Don't you recognize the Scarab alarm?
The Blue Scarab shows off his scarab sting and then proclaims that Jerry must never draw again, or else he, the Blue Scarab, will turn to a life of crime, ruining Jerry's creation. With his final statement, the Blue Scarab vanishes in a cloud of smoke. We then cut to Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy reading a Blue Scarab comic book at the malt shop. Right next to them, Velma reads a newspaper with an article that recounts Jerry's trouble. Daphne writes this off as a publicity stunt to sell more comics, but Scrappy convinces them otherwise, so they head out to see if they can help Jerry. Interviewing Jerry Sloan, he shows them the sign of the Scarab, which is a gigantic scarab symbol on his wall.
This is very interesting.
In the comic, the Blue Scarab leaves this mark to warn criminals that he will be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
Stay here. I'll be back.
He wants me to stop drawing his comics. So, I am.
The gang also learns that Jerry has an assistant who does the lettering for the Blue Scarab. With very few clues to go off of, Freddy asks to meet the publisher, to which Jerry gives him the address. Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy decide to stay behind though to read Jerry's comic book collection, including the latest issue of the Blue Scarab, which has yet to hit the shelves.
This is no time to be reading comic books, Uncle Scooby.
Huh?
Hey, Dr. Joe, no time for love!
Blue Scarab Super Crook?
That's next month's issue.
We'll just stay here and catch up on our reading. Cleaning. We'll clean up this mess, all right, Fred?
At the publishing company, Freddy and the girls meet Mr. Hardy. Hardy tells the gang that if Jerry doesn't keep writing/drawing, he'll fire him as it is their #1 comic.
If Sloan won't draw, I'll have no other choice.
And without the sales, they'll go bankrupt. A creepy artist with an even creepier accent named Floyd Hotchkiss walks by exclaiming that Jerry is a hack and that he should be fired so he, Floyd, can take over.
And if Sloan doesn't draw him, I'm out millions.
I've told you, Hardy, Jerry Sloan is through. Wise up and dump Sloan.
Back at Jerry's studio, Jerry is explaining to Scrappy, Scooby, and Shaggy how comics go from the drawing board to their finished form. Again, we hear the Scarab alarm.
Oh no!
And the Scarab appears. Once more, the Blue Scarab threatens Jerry before, once again, disappearing in a cloud of smoke. Scrappy races after the Blue Scarab and ends up catching Jerry's assistant/letterer, Howard Gruber.
What'd you expect? I'm just a little puppy.
The rest of the gang run in.
That's Howard Gruber, my assistant.
What happened?
Hey, what happened?
And between the two groups, they have no idea how the Blue Scarab escaped because he didn't run past Freddy or Daphne or Velma, and Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy and Jerry saw him go out that specific door. Shaggy also exclaims that in the latest issue, the Blue Scarab is hypnotized by a villain into leading a life of crime. In this comic, his first crime is to rob a jewelry store. This brings us to Romeo Jewelry, where the Night Watchman is reading the latest issue of the Blue Scarab by flashlight. Here, the Night Watchman hears the Scarab signal right before the Blue Scarab breaks through the front entrance and knocks him out with a jolt of electricity.
Boy, this guy's really something. What was that? Hold it right there, mister.
Now for the jewel.
The Blue Scarab makes off with the valuable jewels as the guard calls the police for help. The gang hear about the jewelry store robbery on the radio, so they read the comic to see what happens next, which just so happens to be a bank heist. Seconds later, they hear on the radio that he has already robbed a bank.
The Blue Scarab made off with almost $1 million worth of valuable gems.
The Blue Scarab's next crime is a bank heist.
The Blue Scarab has struck again, this time at the first Midtown bank where he escaped.
Reading the comic further, Velma declares his next target will be the City Museum.
And his next target is the City Museum.
Arriving at the museum, the Blue Scarab attempts to kill Scrappy by pushing a stone gargoyle on him. Scooby saves the day and rescues the pup just in time. The gang race into the museum and onto the roof to capture the Blue Scarab, while Scrappy stays behind to build a trap. Shaggy suggests he'd rather be in Brazil where things are safer, but apparently he's forgotten the trauma of being captured by headhunters and almost eaten alive by the Jaguaro, which happened just a couple years ago in Jeepers, It's the Jaguaro.
Where? Oh, I don't know. Oh, Brazil. We'll be back before you know it.
After robbing the museum of the Ruby Crown, the Blue Scarab once again escapes. Back at Jerry's office, he gets the bad news that 1,000 comic book fans have already canceled their subscriptions. Velma suspects the Blue Scarab might sabotage the printing press, so they head off to the publishing company factory to investigate.
We'll find him faster if we all split up.
You'll never learn.
At the factory, Scrappy rushes in and leaps on the Blue Scarab's head. A small tussle occurs and the Blue Scarab ends up caught in a roll of paper. Everyone then heads off to Jerry's apartment where they unmask the Blue Scarab, which turns out to be Howard Gruber, Jerry's assistant slash letterer.
I don't believe it.
He just padded his suit and loaded it with gimmicks that you created in your comic.
If I could destroy the Scarab, there'd be a chance for me to do my own character.
Velma explains that since the comic book which the Blue Scarab was acting out was unpublished, only Jerry, Howard, and Jerry's publisher would know the story. The second clue was also that when they saw the Blue Scarab for the second time, they didn't see anyone but Howard in the hallway. And then another clue was that the Blue Scarab had to have been a good artist as he left his drawing, the sign of the scarab, on the wall, which was amazing.
This is very interesting.
Howard was jealous of the Blue Scarab's success, so he made a fake costume and made up all these Blue Scarab gimmick gadgets so he could imitate the Blue Scarab and just build a notoriety of the Blue Scarab for being a villain instead of a hero. That way the comic would be cancelled and he could start his own comic with his own characters. With another mystery solved, the Blue Scarab is hauled off to jail and Scrappy suggests that Jerry should start a new hero called the Blue Scooby. One thing I find funny about this ending though is that they capture the Blue Scarab in the factory, yet they drag him with his mask on all the way to Jerry's apartment with the police. I find that kind of funny. Something else to think about is that Howard just robbed a jewelry store, a museum, and committed a bank heist where he probably stole millions of dollars. He could retire on that money. He wouldn't even have to be a comic book creator anymore. So his plan didn't really make sense when he could just kind of retire on a luxury yacht with all the money he stole. But anyway, my thoughts. I give this episode a 7.5 out of 10. I know it's easy to hate on any Scrappy episode and say that it stinks, but overall, this is a fun episode. Yes, it's the first appearance of Scrappy, and yes, Scrappy is kind of annoying. I know he has his fans. I'm not particularly a fan, but I understand why they created him. Scooby-Doo still manages to be kind of creepy, and it maintains its formula of, a monster that or a villain that is someone in disguise. But this plot and villain are a bit cleverer than the typical Scooby episode we've seen. So it's also a nice change too from the Ghost of the Week formula we've saw for the past decade. Usually the villains were ghosts, which I love, but it's nice that they tried something different with the comic book villain. My main issue with Scrappy isn't that he's annoying, it's just that he takes time away from Velma, Daphne, and Fred. They just aren't given as much to do in this episode, and I love those characters and I miss their presence. For example, it's established in this episode that there's something called a Scrappy trap, and this might hint at future episodes where we no longer see the classic and comical Freddy traps that never work, and instead they're manufactured by a Scrappy, and I'm not a fan of that. The villain also is not scary at all, and there's nothing spooky to be seen here. So yes, while I kind of like that this isn't the Ghost of the Week, I do miss the spookiness atmosphere that we got in previous Scooby-Doo episodes. My favorite part here would have to be the old jewelry store security guard reading a comic book by flashlight, because that's just kind of how I want to live my life when I'm 65. I want to be locked in a room with a comic book guarding some crown jewels. Still a great script and worth a watch. The animation is also top notch here, higher than we've seen it in the past. Anyway, regardless, thank you for any thumbs up. Thank you for the views. Thank you for any subscriptions. I appreciate it. And until next time, when we will be covering the ghost who sacked the quarterback, stay spooky.
We'll find him faster if we all split up.
You'll never learn.